It's not on. It's not. We're not ready. Mhm. Oh, no. So there.
Almost size.
Hmm. You're not going to be able to see Jerry. Right? You'll be able to see Jerry. Unless you can give me something. I mean, tripod? It goes up. Yeah. I don't know, a little bit. A little bit. That's all. Is it still low? Yeah, let me see if we can see. Him standing in the way. Oh. Yeah, the mic should be on in a minute.
Testing. Welcome everyone to the Arlington Committee of 100's program for this month. Our forum for the candidates for the office of Commonwealth's attorney in the June 20th Democratic primary. My name is Jerry Laporte. I'm chairperson of the Arlington Committee of 100. If you're watching us on Facebook Live and you think this is something that your friends, your Facebook friends would like to watch, please consider sharing the Facebook Live to your page. I want to start out by welcoming the elected officials who are with us today. We have Carla De La Pava in the back. Carla, you want to stand there? And Libby Garvey to my right over here. Thank you very much for being with us today. If I missed any elected officials who are with us, please let us know by let me know by sending a note up, or if there's an elected official online, if you'd like to be recognized, just note that in the Q&A box, and we'll pick it up and recognize you later in the program. I'd like to thank Patrick Hope and John Bystad, who are co-chairs of the Committee of 100's Program Committee, for their efforts in organizing tonight's program. I'd also like to recognize Craig Syfax, our longtime volunteer videographer. He's back. If he weren't behind the camera, I'd ask him to take a bow so those at home, watching at home, could see him. Craig has put in a lot of volunteer hours for the Arlington Committee of 100 over the years, and we really appreciate all the time that he's devoted to the community in that capacity. Last but not least, I'd like to recognize our partners at Arlington Independent Media for supporting us in providing the online options for tonight's program. Our program for next month on May the 10th will be a forum for the candidates in the Democratic primary for County Board. We'll be holding that program here at Lumber Run Community Center with a lights up and social gathering, just like we did tonight, starting at 6:15 with the actual forum and Zoom online option. starting at 7 p.m. By the way, if any of you are still hungry, we have plenty of food over here. As long as you don't block the camera too much, we don't want to throw away this food. So please feel free to go over there and pick up some more either during the forum or afterwards. You need to register for the next month's program. We'll have the registration options up on our webpage very soon. Before getting to the actual candidates forum, I want to make a plug for support for our organization, the Arlington Committee of 100. You can support us in a number of ways. One is to become a member of the organization. Members are individuals and couples who make a financial donation to the organization during the current membership year, which is July the 1st to June the 30th. If you believe in our mission of addressing community issues in a nonpartisan, community-wide way and gathering community members to meet and talk about these issues in a civil way, please become a member by making a donation to the Arlington Committee of 100. Please see the chat box or our website for a link to make a financial donation and become a member. Or you can send us a check at the post office box, which is up on the screen, and you can also find that post office postal address on our website. You can also support us by volunteering for our organization. We really need volunteers. We've lost a lot of infrastructure and volunteer capacity both before and during the pandemic. You can volunteer by going to our website and clicking on the Get Involved tab, or as of this month, we also have some openings listed on the Volunteer Arlington website, where you can go and take a look at those opportunities and see if those opportunities posted meet your skill set and your skill set and the way that you want to contribute to our community. Before I introduce the panelists tonight, I want to let you know that you can submit a question at any time for either or both of the candidates to answer during the question and answer period of this forum after the initial presentations. If you're on Zoom, you can submit a question by going to the Q&A box on your Zoom screen. And if you're here in person, I will recognize you. Going to have to try to balance between the online questions and the in-person questions. I think we'll see how that goes. But we're going to try to balance and give everybody a chance to ask questions. We've already got quite a few questions. We actually probably have enough questions to fill up the time period, but we're going to give people a question and an opportunity to ask questions in person. The candidates in the Democratic primary for Arlington and for the Commonwealth's attorney for Arlington and Falls Church are with us tonight. They are Marissa Degani Tofty and Josh Katcher. The committee of 100 tries to be a neutral forum, and I'm supposed to be a neutral moderator. So rather than pick out items from the candidates' bios that we think might be relevant, we're going to let them introduce themselves during the course of their remarks this evening. Each candidate will have up to 4 minutes to make an opening remarks in the order that we're now going to determine by asking the candidates to draw a slip of this Washington Nationals cap, which is appropriate to mark the beginning of the baseball season. So. They're sticky, so you have to. Okay, Marissa Drew first, and Josh will be second. After opening remarks, each candidate will have an opportunity to ask the other candidate a question in the same order as they provided opening remarks. So for the question, Marissa will go first, and then Josh. We'll then go to questions from the audience. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to answer each question, with the candidate to whom a question is directed getting the first opportunity to answer the question. If the question is directed to both candidates, Excuse me. We will start by giving the candidate who provided the first set of opening remarks, that's Carissa, with the first opportunity to answer the questions. We will then rotate on subsequent questions addressed to both candidates, and then next one, Josh will go, and then Carissa will go until we get to the end of the question period. We reserve the right to allow a candidate who first answered a question to provide a 1-minute rebuttal to the second answer if the second answer mentions the first candidate directly or indirectly. I doubt that we'll need that tonight, a rebuttal answer, because we only have 2 candidates, so it should be fairly orderly, I hope. At the end of the question period, about 7:50 or 7:55, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make a closing statement in the reverse order of their opening remarks. So it'll be Josh first, and then Carissa second for the closing statements. Okay, Carissa, you're first on opening statement.
Thank you, Jerry, and the Arlington Committee of 100 for your invitation to be here tonight, and thank you for coming up. Friends, I am Carissa Degani-Tafti, and I am your Commonwealth's attorney. Since taking office, I've kept the promises I ran on 4 years ago and turned our office from one that was stuck in the past to one that leads the country on criminal justice reform and safety. 4 years ago, I promised to focus on serious crimes, and we have. We inherited multiple open homicide cases and obtained convictions in them. We've aggressively prosecuted child sex cases and rape, including seeking extradition of suspects, not just from around the country, but from around the world who committed crimes here. We've led the way on emergency substantial risk orders and gotten guns out of the hands of people who are potentially dangerous. And yes, despite much disinformation, we've prosecuted serious property crimes, including carjacking cases that the police have brought to us that had solid evidence. Let me be clear. The overall conviction rate of the office of my opponent championed was less than 60% between 2015 and 2019. Ours between 2020 and the end of 2022 is 72%, more than 72%. The overall felony conviction rate of the office my opponent championed was less than 50% in 2015 to 19. Ours from 2020 to 2022 is more than 70%. Now, those are cases that went to trial and had guilty verdicts. Those are jury trials, bench trials. And we've taken to trial a higher proportion of cases than the office my opponent worked in and campaigned for in 2019. And we've done all of that without asking for cash bail, never seizing property without a conviction, creating a behavioral health docket, quadrupling the number of people in drug court, creating a restorative justice program, and creating a conviction review unit, which has already reversed 1 conviction. 4 years ago, it was an open secret that not only was Arlington one of the most regressive jurisdictions in the Commonwealth when it came to criminal justice, but also that the office was mismanaged. If that sounds like an exaggeration, let me offer 3 concrete examples. First, a state agency concluded that between 2009 and 2019, Arlington was #1 in the entire Commonwealth in disparities in referring Black kids to the criminal legal system. Second, independent researchers were brought into our office to examine 2017 and 18 charging data. They reported that controlling for other factors, Black people were charged at a 50% higher rate of seriousness than white people by this office. And if you were Black or Hispanic, you had a higher likelihood of being convicted, getting a carceral sentence, and a longer period of probation. Third, if you were a prosecutor in the office in December 2019 and you left work, you didn't have the ability to access case files remotely. And you couldn't access them unless you physically returned to the office. Can you imagine an organization entering the year 2020 with the technological capability of a backwater office in 1999? In just 3 years, we've begun to fix all of that. But our work isn't done. Let's make sure victims get the restitution they need promptly. Raise the allowance of mental health care for victims. Guarantee quality representation for all defendants by providing counsel at first appearance. Advocate for pay parity for public defenders and create an effective gun buyback program. I offer these concrete policies and hope that I will earn your vote on June 20th. I'm Carissa Degani Tafti, and I am your Commonwealth's attorney.
My name is Josh Catcher, and I am running for Commonwealth's attorney because we are failing to accomplish real reform and real justice in our community. Let me give you some examples. My opponent has claimed that she has addressed or started to address racial disparities in the justice system, but there's no proof. My campaign specifically reached out to her office for a report that was supposed to be issued last fall, and there was no report. The only report that's been referenced is the one you just heard about, which is the one that was from 2017 to 2018. So apparently we're just supposed to take her at her word. That's not real reform. My opponent talked about creating a mental health docket and expanding drug court. These are collaborative efforts that were already on their way when she took office. And these are things that are originated and managed by the court system, not the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. She's taking credit for someone else's work. That's not real reform. She has trumpeted her creation of the conviction integrity units, but there are some things that are being omitted. The position was advertised as a temporary position. It was unfilled for 9 months. I'm sorry, it was filled for a mere 9 months. It went unfilled for the better part of a year. And the person who's now part of the unit isn't even licensed to practice in Virginia. That's not real reform either. I'm running because we're failing to deliver on the promise of reform. And let's turn to real justice. Recently, 2020 aired an expose on my opponent's decision to charge and prosecute an innocent man for murder. The case was so weak that the jury came back in under an hour with a not guilty verdict. And let me be clear, I have prosecuted people for reckless driving and had a jury deliberate longer than that. One of the jurors went on national TV and openly wondered why the case was even brought. And this man is going to forever be someone who is accused of murder. That's not real reform. Last year, a circuit court judge found that my opponent's prosecutors failed to disclose evidence to a defendant. This is what a judge said in writing. There have been a litany of violations involving evidence being withheld and blatant misrepresentations by the Commonwealth. Defendants cannot get a fair trial if the Commonwealth is hiding evidence and not being upfront about things. That's not real reform. Yesterday, Oral Now covered the shameful treatment of Braylon Mead's family that Braylon Mead's family received from my opponent. And I'm only talking about this because his mother, Rose Kehoe, is here tonight and has given me permission to talk about this. Braylon was a high school senior who was killed in a drunk driving incident last November. Ms. Kehoe had this to say about Ms. Degani Tafti. She has repeatedly claimed that focusing on victims is a governing priority. Our experience with her could not have been further from the truth. From the very beginning, her only concern was not about justice for Braylon, but about ensuring a positive and productive future for the defendant. Ms. Kehoe went on to explain that my opponent did not even attend the final sentencing argument. That is not real justice. I have both the experience and the relationships to deliver real reform and real justice for Arlington. I was a prosecutor for 11 years. I started off as an unpaid intern and rose to the level of deputy Commonwealth's attorney, where I was in charge of training up the next generation of reformed prosecutors. Unlike my opponent, I have tried cases in every court in the courthouse, from traffic infractions up to and including murder. I have served as president of the Arlington County Bar Association, and I've had the opportunity to train police officers, defense attorneys, and prosecutors on the law. I know this job and I know our community. I have knocked more than 2,000 doors in the last 3 months, and what I've heard is that people are concerned with the direction of this office. They want a Commonwealth's attorney who spends less time. She had a couple more seconds after that sign already went up as well. They want a Commonwealth's attorney who spent less time on Facebook and more time in the courtroom. They want a Commonwealth's attorney that's willing to acknowledge rising crime and the centrality of justice for victims. And they want prosecutors who have the opportunity to engage in meaningful reform prosecution. They want real reform and real justice. And I ask for your support.
Thank you. Thanks to you both for your opening remarks. Now we'll go to the question that each candidate will ask to the other one, and we'll start with Marissa. You can ask Josh a question, and then Josh will be able to add this person question, and each will have 2 minutes to answer.
Mr. Catcher, you were working in an office that prosecuted hundreds of possession of marijuana cases every year, disproportionately Black people. An office that sought the death penalty whenever it could, asked for cash bail daily, and had only 4 people in drug court at the end of 2019, and opposed voting rights restoration, and took the position that to prosecute pregnant people, if abortion was criminalized in Virginia, it would do it. You worked for that office, you campaigned for that administration, and on the eve of the 2019 election said that that office was a shining example of progressive prosecution, and we should vote for more of that. And now you talk about real reform and real justice, but I would like to know 3 things you've done that are considered criminal justice reform, without referring to me, without referring to the fact that I kept you on in the office, and without referring to the time that I was your supervisor.
Well, so obviously, this language that's being quoted back as something that my opponent had in possession at the time she hired me. And at that time, she made the decision that I was worthy of being part of the reform efforts. And now we're unfortunately having to deal with the intellectual inconsistency and hypocrisy of something apparently changed. I think we all know what changed. It was that I decided to come forth with what was happening in the office and run against her. But let's not forget that at the time that I was also promoted, and that I was subsequently put in charge of training up the next generation of reform prosecutors. My opponent would like to completely ignore that fact because it completely undermines her argument, but I think it's completely irrelevant to do so. This whole campaign right now is about being honest with people. That's why I started during my opening and talked about the things that are being claimed as success stories, but that in fact are not. As for the language about this being a shining example, let me give you an example of how things are again being distorted. That was language that I used to describe the following things, and you can let me know if you believe that you support them or not. That language was used to describe drug court, which I said during my opening was already in existence. And I said I applauded the fact that drug court was being used in Arlington County. It was in relationship, and the context was for Second Chance, a program in which more than 500 juveniles had been diverted from the system. That's exactly the type of reform and diversion work that we want to see happen here in Arlington County. And the last bit of context that it was in the context of the Arlington County Police Department having such pride in the diversity of its police department because they were sending in officers and a cruiser into the DC Pride Parade. Those were the type of shining examples of things in Arlington County that I thought worthwhile to talk about 4 years ago, and I still think they're worthwhile things that we should be talking about right now. But the question for me is, last week at the OAR forum, you stated that I don't plan on certifying juveniles as adults in the future. You subsequently attacked me when I indicated that hypothetically I could conceive of some circumstances where it might be appropriate. This week, in regard to the question of whether the drunk driver who killed Braylon Mead should be certified as an adult, you told Arl Now, my team and I met with Braylon's family, listened to them, and carefully considered this case before determining it was not an appropriate case for transfer. So which is it? There are no circumstances under which you would ever certify a juvenile, what you said last week, or there conceivably are circumstances, but they weren't present here, what you said this week.
when I think about what happened to Braylon, I remember when my own son was born. And I remember that my husband and I would watch over him at night, watching him breathe, just to make sure that he would continue, that he wouldn't stop breathing. And that is the connection that we had from minutes and hours of knowing him. The idea of having a son who is about to launch and become the adult that you had always hoped that they would be, and then having them ripped from you is something that is horrifying beyond words. And I can understand, why a parent would want to see retribution. Our job as Commonwealth attorneys is to be sensitive to that, but also to follow the law. And the easiest thing to do politically would have been to try to transfer the case. But that would have been a farce, because, and the sentence tells you what would have happened because they're the same considerations, would have been a farce because the criteria just were not met. And it would have put the family through something like an entire trial. So I don't think that children should be tried as adults. But I also take every single case seriously and consider it for the value of what it is. There is nothing that could have been done in terms of the legal system, because the only just thing is to bring Braylon back.
Thank you. By the way, you have up to 2 minutes. You don't have to take 2 minutes if you can answer it in less than 2 minutes.
I'm going to start out with a question that we got online, and then we'll ask a question from the in-person audience. What is the one change you'd make in 2024? This is from Chris DeRosa. And Marissa, you start.
I mean, it's hard to say just one change, but what I would like is to see our conviction review unit be permanently funded, because it's hard to find people who want to take temporary jobs right now, and the county has not put its money where its mouth is on justice and funded us permanently. I would like an investigator for my office so that we can close up the loose ends of investigations. I would like to see the victim restitution fund, and I would like to see counsel at first appearance, because you can spend up to 5-6 days in a jail cell without even having a hearing on bond. Right now, that's not fair.
Josh.
The first priority in my administration is going to be rebuilding the office. We've lost 14 attorneys in the past year and a half. My best understanding of what's going on in the office, at least as of 2 weeks ago, is that there are 7 fully funded vacant attorney positions. So the office is dealing with the capacity issue. And if you're dealing with the capacity issue, you cannot improve the justice system. You cannot seek justice for victims. You cannot address rising crime. You cannot train up the next generation of reformed prosecutors. There is so much that cannot be done because the number of people that are currently not in the office, and more importantly, the people who are in the office, are completely overwhelmed. We had a bank robbery just yesterday where there was a hostage situation. We need a couple more attorneys in the office who can handle that case, because if you only have 1 or 2, they're going to be completely overwhelmed handling all of the serious cases. And more importantly, if they're never brought off of the front line and given an opportunity to maybe go to traffic court or do some misdemeanors, they're going to ultimately leave because they're not getting the support they need. And they're going to be caught in this vicious cycle of needing to hire new people and all of a sudden losing less or losing more and more seasoned, experienced prosecutors. So the number one thing we have to do to truly accomplish the goals of real reform or real justice is to rebuild the system so that we can actually have a fully staffed office.
Thank you. Let's try, we're still working out of the pandemic, and this is not the first event that we've had at this location, but we're still dealing with the limits in this is a great location, but we only have one microphone tonight. So I'm gonna ask, and I am hearing disabled, so I may have trouble hearing you, but do we have any questions from the audience? And I will try to repeat the question for people at home if, go ahead.
Use the microphone.
If you want to come up,
Do you have another HDMI?
might be better.
Hi,
That's the only one.
can you all hear me? Thank you. My name is Diana Dempsey. Teresa, I voted for you in the first election. I'm now supporting Josh and I met him when he was canvassing. I'm very good friends with Rose and Chris, Rose Keogh and Chris Mead. Braylon was like a child to me. He was best friends with one of my kids. So I have a couple of concerns with the way that you handled this case. One is just pure common sense with how you treat anybody. I think I treat my students, I'm a teacher, and their families with more time than you gave their family. Oh, shoot, okay. In the formal question, sorry. Question is, Josh, when you came to my house canvassing, you said, oh, I'm addressing it to Josh. Sorry, never stood up and done this before, so sorry, I'm a little nervous. Josh, when you came to my house, you said that there might have been other ways to handle the case of the person that killed Braylon. Specifically, had he been charged as an adult, which Teresa just said was not an option. What else could have happened in a hypothetically similar case? Because you had said at the time that you couldn't necessarily comment on that. I don't know if the case is closed now, if you could.
So I'm gonna say the same thing that I said on the doors initially, which is I don't have the full facts of the case. And as a prosecutor, I would be very reluctant to engage in a discussion specifically about the case. And I just think that that would be irresponsible for me to do. But as it relates to juvenile cases and tough juvenile cases, I think it's worthwhile to consider that there are a variety of ways in which this can be approached. And let's also acknowledge that juvenile justice is the hardest type in the system. I start by thinking about whether or not it's an appropriate case for a transfer. But just because you're transferring a case, what that means is you take it from the juvenile domestic relations court and you transfer it to the circuit court. But just because it gets there doesn't mean the individual is going to be treated like an adult and get an adult sentence. What it really does is it expands the flexibility, the options available to you. There are some type of juvenile cases that can result in what's called a blended sentence. For example, in a blended sentence, an individual can receive a juvenile-related sentence in the form of a commitment. Usually that means they're going to do some type of juvenile detention. And then upon completion of their commitment, they can then have what would be considered an adult sentence that could result in an active period of adult incarceration, or it can result in an active period of probation. Because you're up in the circuit court, there can be a lengthier period of probation than there could be just simply based with JDR court. And I'll come back to say, like, the general ability of the JDR court is prescribed within the prerogatives of what the JDR court is supposed to be about, which is chiefly about rehabilitation, but there, of course, is always going to be an accountability function. So the discussion we were having on the door, and again, not knowing the full facts of the case, was simply that there are some instances. For example, let's say if you wanted to have a lengthy period of probation with a substance abuse component, that if they were transferred to circuit court, you could engage in one of those blended sentences that I talk about.
Just because you want to transfer a case doesn't mean that it gets transferred. There are a number of, there has to be a hearing. And that hearing, at that hearing, the Commonwealth would have to fulfill a number of elements and conditions. And this case did not have those. And it's not automatic. And the only thing that adult court provides is an option for longer periods of incarceration. Juvenile court is the place where rehabilitative services are provided. And in this case, there was a year of detention plus probation imposed. And the fact that a year sentence plus probation was imposed when we asked for 3 years of detention tells you that that judge was not going to transfer it to adult court, because he would have given that 3-year sentence if he was going to transfer it to adult court, because the sentencing considerations are the same as the transfer considerations.
Thank you. We'll go to an online question. This is a question from Lisa Tingle, addressed to Carissa. Says you established a community advisory board. How often has that body met and what has been reviewed by them?
The Community Advisory Board meets about every quarter. One of the members of the board is actually here, and we discuss progress with data, we discuss progress with restorative justice, we discuss all of the initiatives that the office is working on, and I hear from them. I ask them questions. What is the community concerned about? And we make sure that we included somebody from every single zip code of Arlington, and that we made sure that we had a variety of experience, a variety of backgrounds, that this was truly a diverse group. And so they bring me their issues and we update them on the office. I ask them for help and I ask them for advice.
On the community advisory board?
Yes, you can respond to person's answer to that question.
I don't like to follow on that.
Okay, let's take another question from the in-person audience, and remember, just ask a question in the form of a question. We want questions, not speeches.
Hi, I'm Sarah Somerville. I won't make a speech, but I have to lay the foundation before I pose the question. My question is about carjacking. And I read somewhere that there had been 10 carjacking in the Crystal City area alone since first of the year, January. Ms. County Attorney said there was not solid evidence, and that in all of the cases where there had been solid evidence, they were prosecuted. We had a bunch of kids, folks from DC and Maryland coming over here taking their cars. So I'd like to hear your response to, did you arrest 10 people or are 10 people being prosecuted, or for 10 carjackings, or only those with the solid evidence? And I want to know, what is this particular solid evidence you must have if somebody takes my car?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because when the carjacking started in late 2020, early 2021, I urged the ACP to join a regional task force called the WAVE Task Force, and it took several months to convince them to join. And when they did, we worked together and worked with other jurisdictions to make sure that we were solving these crimes and prosecuting them appropriately. What I can tell you about the cases that we've seen since the beginning of 2020 is that we've seen 21 unique defendants. 8 of them were juveniles, 5 of them were young adults. The juvenile cases are handled in JDR, but for the adults, what we've seen, if somebody is a young adult, in those 5 cases, what we did was they got sentences of 20 to 30 years. And they were suspended except for 4. And the reason why 4 is important is because 4 is the amount of time that they were going to spend in the youthful offender program, which is, it's called boot camp, you know, in slang, but it is just, it's a carceral program, so they're in prison, it's for young adults, and it provides rehabilitative services, you know, like parenting, like education, like job skills. And so if they succeed in those 4 years, then they will come out to a period of probation with the rest of that time hanging over their head. So anything between 16 and 26 years, depending on the individual case. For if they don't succeed in that 4 years, then the longer sentence kicks in. And those are the cases that are resolved. The other cases are still pending.
Just comment on this briefly, 2 points. First off, back in November, when I announced I was running, I started talking about the fact that we have rising crime in Arlington. I wasn't trying to get into the causal argument at that time, but I thought it important that we acknowledge it so that we'd be able to address that. And at the time, my opponent pretty much outright denied it and then said that I was engaging in right-wing talking points. And that's frustrating because if we are not going to be able to talk about these things publicly, we're not going to be able to have a worthwhile dialogue and come up with appropriate solutions. And it's not just about carjackings, and it's not just about fentanyl that's finding its way in our schools. It's not just about the rising crime we've seen against the person in the form of 16% and the rising property crime that's 23% year over year. It's about a general approach to the way that we're going to interact with the facts and the reality before us in this community. And I think right now, having knocked so many of these doors, people are desperate for honesty about these things. That's the first point I want to make about it. The second point relates to the capacity issue I mentioned during my opening. If we have people leaving the office at such a high rate, we're not going to be able to aggressively prosecute those cases that the community rightly wants to do so, to see so. For example, carjacking, because the number of people who can handle those type of complex cases are going to continue to dwindle.
No, you can only, you're only entitled to a rebuttal if, sort of attack. And I mean, I know that, you know, he's talking about your record necessarily, but it wasn't the kind of, I don't think it requires rebuttal. You know, in the context of answering another question.
No.
Yeah, we don't have any provision for following on, okay, that's not, the rules are up there. Okay, let's move to the next question, this is from Mark Blacknell, who's online, and this is a question that's addressed to both the candidates, so since Marissa responded to the first question addressed to both the candidates, Josh will get an opportunity to respond first to this one. How much credit or blame does the Commonwealth's attorney deserve for crime rates in their jurisdiction?
That was a nice segue from what I started talking about in my last point. I think the question is not really about the causal argument, especially at this point, because it would be very difficult for me or for anyone else to point to data or evidence suggesting that this is happening because of X, Y, and Z variable, because we don't have the data, right? That's why one of the reasons it's front and center in my campaign, talking about transparency, is because we don't actually know what's happening. We don't actually know how cases are being handled. One of the things that I've heard my opponents say repeatedly is that they are taking violent crime, serious cases, and aggressively prosecuting them. But there's just no proof to that effect. Aside from 1 or 2 cases that are occasionally highlighted on social media or via press release, we don't have the data. And so I would start by saying that we don't even know how to figure out if there is a reason to point a finger and say that someone's responsible. I'm not doing it at this point. But what I'll also say is we know that here in Arlington, we are always going to be a target. We have relative affluence and we are close to a jurisdictional line. So it makes sense that we're going to be a target. And when I talk about real reform, What I'm really saying is there's a class of cases that the community wants to see rightly and aggressively prosecuted. And what I'm really shorthanding is we cannot present ourselves as a soft target when it comes to people bringing drugs or guns or bringing violence into our community. And I've heard that over and over again on the doors, and I think that's squarely in alignment with what we believe 21st century prosecution should look like. It's an apolitical response. So I will just come back to that fact. I think that we don't know what the data suggests, so we can't analyze it. But if we're going to take a position on certain types of cases, we should not be presenting ourselves as a soft target.
I just told everybody what we did with all of the carjacking cases that the ACPD brought to us. And both back in 2020/2021, when this was happening, the ACPD did exactly what they should do, which is they started a proactive policing. They put a car on Richmond Highway, they went into the neighborhoods and told people to pay attention. And that reduced the carjackings to zero, and they stayed at zero for months. We have initiated and are the founding members of a task force with the Virginia State Police, who's come to us, our office, to prosecute the regional carjacking and car theft cases. They came to us to create a task force with us to prosecute these cases. And I have more data. What we know is that Arlington County, compared to 2016, the referrals for cases are down 30%. What that means is that people are not being caught, not that people are not being prosecuted, but they're not being caught. The cases that the various law enforcement agencies that we work with that have been brought to us have been disposed of just as I told you. Literally, that's the data. And then I'm going to go back to these other numbers, that the number of trials where we got guilty verdicts, again, between 2015 to 19 was under 60%. In this administration, over 70. Felony trials, where the top charge was a guilty verdict. In 2015 to 19, less than 50%. In 2020 to 22, over 70%.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take another question from the audience. Okay, let's go to this side.
My name's Ellie. Carissa, and if you could speak to your current policy, and Josh, your position and your future plan in regards to what your position is on mandatory minimums, and how and if they would be utilized in terms of the negotiations.
So mandatory minimums have driven up mass incarceration and have driven up the disparities in the system. So I don't favor them. Our office policy is to try not to charge with a mandatory minimum unless it's the only accurate charge. So for example, we've charged somebody for serial rape with a mandatory minimum of life because that was the only accurate charge. But we also try to create because we've even federal judges have said that they feel very constrained by mandatory minimums. And so what we try to do is charge in a way that allows a judge the maximum amount of flexibility to sentence. And so we disfavor them, but we use them in outlier cases, in cases of serious dangerousness, and in cases where that's the only accurate charge.
When I think about mandatory minimum cases, I think about cases like being a violent felon in possession of a firearm. But the truth is that might be the case that immediately comes to mind, or being a serial rapist when you have a second subsequent conviction for rape. Under those cases, or for example, possessing with intent to distribute controlled substances, second and third offense, right? These are the cases that are there on the outliers, that are very extreme cases that I think the community wants to see rightly and aggressively prosecuted. But on the other side, there are other cases that have mandatory minimums associated with them that I frankly think there are ways in which you can still appropriately hold someone accountable without having to have the mandatory minimum. And I tend to agree on this one, that there is a lack of flexibility that can sometimes be associated with certain cases like that. So I think the position as it relates to plea agreements is, if there are going to be cases that are kind of those extreme cases involving serious violent crime, guns, or drugs, I think those are appropriate cases to bring the charge of the mandatory minimum. But there are some other cases that I think there's kind of an appropriate other set of cases, charges that can still hold a person accountable. I don't think the mandatory minimums should be used for plea negotiation. I think the decision to go forward with the mandatory minimum should have nothing to do with what the desired dispositional outcome of the case is. I think instead it should be about what charge we think is appropriate to go forward on.
Thanks to both of you. This is an online question. This is addressed to Marissa from Craig Posteen. Since Josh mentioned that the office is not fully staffed, how do you plan to address current staffing issues in your office and retention of experienced attorneys?
So let me start with the fact that Reuters wrote an article last year that said that there is a prosecution, retention, and hiring crisis across the nation. The National District Attorneys Association had its first ever job fair in January, which we attended, and there were more employers than there were people seeking jobs. So this is a national problem, and it's not even limited to prosecution. We see it in law enforcement. We see it in the treasurer's office. We see it in DHS. We see it in all of these public-facing, service-oriented professions, including teachers, including social workers. So there is an issue with hiring and retention. We only have 2 open attorney spots that are fully funded and permanent. So I'm not really sure what my opponent is talking about. But we also, I also went door to door talking to every single attorney in the office, asking, what motivates, what they need help with, what they dread doing. And what I learned was that there is an enormous administrative burden that attorneys are not interested and also not qualified really to be doing. And it's a waste of county money to have attorneys doing them. So we're actually reorganizing the office so that we have more paralegals with the ratio of attorneys, so that more of the administrative work, which reform and doing discovery the right way and having body worn camera, all of that creates enormous administrative burden. So we're actually rethinking how the office works in order to free up attorney time to do legal work. So we're just being nimble and responsive.
So I'm going to make 3 points here. The first is that despite the Great Resignation being trotted out as the excuse for why people are leaving, that is patently not correct. I have worked shoulder to shoulder with the people who left the office. I've had them come in, close the door, break down in tears because they're struggling with a difficult decision to leave a job they love. And you don't just have to take my word for it. You can look at the same period in which we lost 13 attorneys in that 13-month period. You know how many attorneys the city of Alexandria, Commonwealth attorneys lost? 2. You know how many during the same period the Prince William County Commonwealth Attorney's Office lost? An office that is twice our size, less than us. The final point I'll make is that this is Arlington County. People want to live and work here. It should not be this difficult to recruit people to come here. And I will tell you that many, at least 5 of the attorneys who have left said they will come back provided there's a change in management. And I do want to address the point about the number of open attorney spots in the office. We got that information from the Arlington County HR department. They specifically said as of, it was 2 weeks ago, that there are 7 fully funded vacant positions in that office. And as far as I've been told from people who are still in the office, someone resigned last week, and I understand that there's gonna be another attorney leaving. For understood reasons, I'm not saying anything that's a surprise. So there are gonna be 2 more attorneys who are gonna be leaving in short succession, if not this week, then next week. So by my count, that puts it up to 9 fully vacant positions.
Yeah, if you want to talk about the statistics, I think you can have 1 minute because he brought some statistics and I think you may be entitled to everybody.
I'd like to just point out of the 13 months that my opponent is talking about, he was a manager for 8 of those months, and many of the people who left were people who were on his team. And I have some staff here. You can ask them. I encourage you to ask them what the office is like.
Thank you.
I just wanted to directly respond about keeping the paper.
While I was a manager, 2 people left. One had quit before I became a manager and then came back to the office, and we all knew he was looking. We all knew this person was looking for a new job. So I was not his manager. Another person who left specifically wrote an email to my opponent to make clear that I had nothing to do with that person leaving. And they took that precaution because they assumed at some point a finger would be pointed at me as the reason for them leaving. That's a foilable email.
Thank you. I'm actually surprised because I just looked at my watch. We're at the end of our allotted time. We didn't talk about this ahead of time, but I think we got a lot of questions. And would you, what would you think about going a few extra minutes? Do you think it's,
Yeah.
do you want to keep going? What does the audience think?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. It's been a very, okay. So where did we? Well, I know, but it's 7:56 p.m. Okay, so. No, just an hour, but I think we've been having a very good discussion. There's a lot of questions. And we actually had 150 people registered online, so we've got potentially 200 people listening to this. So I think it probably deserves another 15 minutes. So I'm trying to remember. Okay, we're in for an audience question. So this gentleman back here had his hand up before, so I'll give him a chance.
Thank you very much. My name is Steve Carruthers. I've lived in Arlington all of my life, raised my children here and grandchildren. My concern is the lack of police officers in Arlington County. And it's my understanding we're as many as 100 short. And my question to Teresa is, what have you done in an effort to increase the police force? Is there anything that you can do to help increase the number? And what kind of relationship do you think you have with the police officers of Arlington?
So I've tried since the beginning to build bridges with the police department. I think that what we need to have is independent, respectful, professional relationships, and those are what I have worked towards. I don't think that one should be chummy with police officers. I think that it is a bad look for independence. In terms of recruiting police officers, that's not something, because they don't report to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, they're a separate agency, which is exactly why we need the independence. There's nothing I can do about the recruiting, but I have worked on building relationships. We have monthly meetings where we're discussing serious cases, particularly in the homicide, robbery, and the vice divisions. So we are working together, and particularly working together very well on the serious cases.
I think if you speak with pretty much any police officer, you're gonna find that there's a complete breakdown between the relationship with the Office of the Commonwealth Attorney and the police department. And that is a big problem because they are our closest agency partner. If they do not believe that we're going to appropriately handle cases and do so in a respectful way, you just can't accomplish the goals of what we're engaged in here. I have worked hard to earn those relationships. When I started 11 years ago, before I had kids, I would routinely go out on ride-alongs with the police officers. Not because I wanted to become chummy with them, but because I wanted to truly understand what was happening out there on the street at all different times of day. And I think that that has been worthwhile because it has led to a place where I can respectfully and professionally talk to people that I've known in a way that I think is different than some other folks in the office because they've seen that I put the time in to understand what they're dealing with. And I think that that is something that every single prosecutor in the office should do. Again, not because they should become chummy with them, but because they are our closest agency partners. I don't think we should ever have a complete breakdown of relationship because at the end of the day, that's going to lead to police officers feeling like serious cases or even less serious cases shouldn't be brought because they're not going to be appropriately addressed.
Thank you. This is a question from online from John Reed. It's to Josh. If elected, will you pledge to continue ending cash bail and diversion of mentally ill addicts? You want me to repeat that question or do you understand?
I think I understand.
Okay. If elected,
What was the second part?
will you pledge to continue ending cash bail and diversion of mentally ill addicts?
So there are two separate questions here. And when we talk about ending cash bail, I think a lot of people have been following the national narrative on this, but there's just a little bit of information to build this up. Typically what happens in Virginia is that a police officer initiates a charge on the street, if you will. The person, if they're placed under arrest, is then going to be brought before a magistrate. So there's no prosecutor involved yet. We're not authorizing the charge. They're going to be brought before a magistrate, and then the magistrate is going to set potentially some form of bond. Let's say the person doesn't get out on bond. What will then happen is they're going to have an arraignment and a subsequent hearing where there's a bond hearing. And then and only then really is when the prosecutor is going to get involved and make a decision about what we should do vis-a-vis their bail. The criteria for determining whether a person should be released is, are they a danger to the community? Are they a flight risk? And so I think the question is, am I going to abide by a policy where we have basically a binary approach to, does this person get out with certain conditions, not having a secured bond? Or does the person stay in? I think that's philosophically the appropriate and fair position. So if I understand that question correctly, yes, I think we should be ending cash bail, i.e. people should not be able to pay money to get out of jail. I think it's fundamentally fair. Second part was diverting mentally ill addicts. If I understand the question correctly, I think it's really a question of, are we going to continue to try to keep those that have mental illness or addictions out of the system? And front and center to all of my philosophy as a reform prosecutor is that there's a core type of case that finds its way into the justice system that is an external policy failure. And the justice system is the one that's dealing with that issue. For example, the addicted, the mentally ill, the unhoused, kids doing kid things. Whenever we can, whenever it's appropriate, whenever there's a good service that we can connect someone with and divert them out of the system with, I think that's absolutely appropriate. Also, because it frees up resources to aggressively prosecute those cases that the community wants to see aggressively prosecuted.
All of which we've done already. I stopped asking for cash bail on January 1, 2020. We have never once asked for cash bail. And we have created a behavioral health docket in partnership with DHS and the courts. And we are in the process right now of doubling the behavioral health docket, and DHS has my full support in that. I'm also working with DHS to handle the situation with people who are unhoused, who have been, repeatedly arrested for trespass, for doing things like sleeping on heating grates at the airport. So I initiated that conversation to start finding solutions with other departments. And then on top of that, we have been freeing up resources to work on the most serious cases. And I'm going to refer you again to the trial conviction rates that are astronomically higher than they were in previous administrations.
Thank you. I think we may have time for one more. This gentleman has had his hand up for a while, so I'm gonna give him the chance to try to keep it short.
Good evening, my name is James, and as I listen to the conversation, clearly this is personal, so I'm going to ask a question that's personal to me. One that I posed to you, Josh, when we met earlier. There was a case recently, actually it was in Alexandria, not Arlington, where it was carjacking, and the gentleman was carrying a concealed firearm, shot the assailants. One was killed. He was not charged. He was a European American, he's a white man. And I posed a question to you about how a black man would be perceived shooting an assailant who was not technically a threat at that time. And I asked that question now to you both because one, we talked about carjacking, two, we talked about guns. I'm a licensed concealed carry permit. I'm a former officer in the military, and we both talk about reform. And for me, my vote comes down to trust. So how do I trust that you will combat against the forces of institutional racism that has historically been disproportionate to Black and brown folks? When as a law-abiding citizen and a homeowner in Arlington, I have to put my faith and my trust that this reform you talk about is something more than a word.
Thank you. I think Josh got the chance to answer the question addressed to both of you first. So this time Carissa has a first opportunity to answer the question addressed to both of you.
James, I'm glad you asked that question. I campaigned on this issue in 2019. I had the courage to bring it up. I had the conviction to stick by what I had promised. And we are addressing those issues every single day, both on a cultural level in terms of having people come and teach about disparities. We've had Chris Henning, who's a professor at Georgetown, in twice. We've had other professors to talk about implicit bias, to talk about how juveniles are perceived, and perceive things differently, and to specifically talk about racial disparities and how people are perceived. I've had my assistants take the Harvard test to gauge their own implicit bias. And we've partnered with Motion for Justice, which is a project for Vera Institute, which is designed to reduce racial disparities. That's professionally, and we have an anti-racism group within the office that was created by staff, and they read books, they watch shows, they have conversations, and they bring out that the message of needing to really address racial disparities. And it's also personal for me. And it's personal for me because when I was pregnant with my son, my husband and I went to the 12 or 13 week sonogram, and we learned he was healthy, which was great, and we learned he was a boy, and the full weight at that moment just fell on me of how do I raise a Black boy in this country.
I think what you're really asking is kind of the arc of one's philosophy and how does it emerge as a prosecutor? And all I can do is talk you through mine in the hope that you listen to it and you say, you know what, that's someone that I would trust to wield the awesome power that we are given to prosecutors. And as I was sitting here thinking about it, my mind leapt ahead to try to give you an intellectual response, but I think I'm just gonna lean into this one and try to be very vulnerable about it. When you start as a prosecutor, if you really are approaching this the right way, you are constantly filled with anxiety. And every single person that is going to be in my office, I want them to start with that anxiety because the weight of the power that we are entrusted with, because we can irrevocably alter the trajectory of someone's life, whether it's for a traffic infraction or a serious sentence. I want them to be worried about how that could land if they wield that power incorrectly. And so that starts off at the high level. And then what you then do, I think the more cases you try, you all of a sudden realize there's an awful lot of experience out there in the world that you don't have any connection to. And at first blush, maybe you look at a set of facts and you say, this makes no sense to me. Why would this happen this way? Right? And let's acknowledge the reality. I am a white man who lives in Arlington County, which probably makes me rank among the most historically fortunate human beings in the history of this planet. And I think from that realization, you have to then have the next conclusion, which is there's an awful lot that I personally have had no association with or connect with. The moment that happened to me, it was very early on as a prosecutor, I was heads up to my blind spots and then sought out everything I could to try to eradicate those blind spots. We can talk about reading the books. We can talk about going to classes. We can talk about the discussion we've had with our friends who have different life experiences. And those are things that I've embraced. And when I had a team of 8 prosecutors, we talked about constantly because I didn't want anyone to ever approach a case and say, this doesn't make sense to me. And that to be an outcome, and that the outcome of the case was because they had no connection to something that made no sense to them, that might have made sense to someone in the community. So all I can tell you is that it's a journey and it continues to be a journey, and it's one that I'm completely open to.
Thanks to both of you. Okay, it's now time for closing statements. You each have 2 minutes, and then the reverse order of opening statements. So Josh gets the first chance to make the closing statement. 2 minutes.
I became a prosecutor because I wanted to seek justice for victims. And that is not currently happening here in Arlington. It's not happening because we have a capacity issue in our office that is preventing victims from getting the justice and the time and the attention they deserve from the prosecutors. It's also happening because we have a Commonwealth attorney who is more focused on the future of the people we are prosecuting than the people we are seeking justice for. But I want to tell you, we can do both. I've done both. I've engaged in just prosecutions while giving my victims the time and the treatment that they deserve, interacting with them with empathy and making sure that they felt heard. And I did that all the while seeking just and equitable outcomes. When I talk about real justice, that is what I'm talking about. That is what Arlington wants. That is not happening, and that is why I'm running.
Over the past 4 years, my office has led the way for criminal justice reform. I didn't wait until the tide turned to do the right thing. I helped turn the tide. I said I was going to stop prosecuting simple marijuana possession because it wasn't making the community safer. I promised to never seek the death penalty because it was inhumane. I promised I would never prosecute a person or their doctor for an abortion. And now that that threat has become all too real, other prosecutors have followed suit, vowing to use their discretion to protect reproductive health. But in the wrong hands, our progress can be taken away. Just as easily as the office was seeking cash bail on December 31st, 2019, and stopped seeking cash bail the very next day when I took office, the reverse can happen too. Just as the previous office ignored immigration consequences and allowed low-level charges to separate families, another office can do the same. So who can you trust to protect progress? I've dedicated my life to building a system that is more fair and more humane for everyone. On the other hand, just 4 years ago, my opponent loyally served a CA who prosecuted hundreds of possession of marijuana cases every year, sought the death penalty at every turn, asked for cash bail, and opposed voting rights restoration. And again, he was telling us that this was a shining example. Now he says he's a new man and that he supports real reform and real justice. But I still don't know what that means. He hasn't told us what it means. My campaign isn't based on a cute slogan, but on actual work and actual results. I've kept my promises and I've implemented reforms that we can all be proud of. So I humbly ask for your support on June 20th.
Thank you. I want to ask all of you to stick with us for a minute. I noticed that Delegate Patrick Hope walked in during the, he was down in Richmond this morning for the session of the, who else? I know, I recognized Libby at the beginning. She only gets one recognition. I guess you gave her two, okay, but that's okay. She deserves a lot of recognition. Patrick came from Richmond at the General Assembly session. We appreciate his being here with us tonight. I want to thank the candidates for being with us. I think this was very enlightening and really helped to all of us who are trying to figure out how to vote on June the 20th. Gave us useful information and deciding how to cast our votes. If you could just be quiet for a minute. I want to remind all of you to save the date. Somehow my computer is not working here, but anyway, on May the 10th, we're going to hold our county board Democratic primary candidate forum here at the Lumber Run Community Center at the same time, same place, 6:15 p.m. We'll have the light supper and social gathering beforehand and the Zoom online option. Also, we have a program on June the 14th. We haven't set a topic, a time or a place for that yet, but if you are a regular at our programs, you know, we usually try to do a good job, and so you might also put that on your calendar and keep your eyes out for emails on what the topic that will be and where it will be. That's it for tonight. Thank you all for being here, and have a great evening.
How you doing there, man?